Welcome to Two-Way Tonight. Thank you for joining. I'm Mark Halperin. There's gonna be smack in the chat. That's a spoiler alert. I got a long, detailed message from a friend. Actually, two different friends sent me messages. One was long and detailed, one was brief. Apparently, despite my admonitions for peace, love, and understanding, the presumption of grace for all, many of you, not an insignificant number of you, MAGA, are putting smack in the chat on YouTube. Don't do it. Just if you don't like things that are positive about Donald Trump or negative about Donald Trump, just listen. Don't put smack in the chat, please. I'm asking you. Let's try tonight, just as a little experiment. Let's not put any smack in the chat. Thank you for your efforts on my behalf. Welcome in. If you're watching on the two-way platform, please get in on the conversation by raising your electronic hand. We'll get to many of you in a slightly different format tonight, so be ready. Questions are coming fast and furious and sooner than you might think. I'll run through the news, and then we'll bring in our excellent guests, and they'll run through the news better than I am going to do. Our guests tonight are two very smart people. The editor of the National Review, Rich Larry. Rich has one title, and it's an august title. Maybe Rich will, for us, name everyone who's had the title editor of National Review before him. Our other guest, Lindsay Keith, has three titles. Sometimes that's more impressive. Sometimes it's a diminution of the power. Chief White House correspondent, political director, and DC managing editor, Merit Street Media. Honored to have them both here, and they'll be here in a moment. They're watching right now, listening to me introduce them and trying to come up with a good starting joke, which is key to public presentation. And then we've got a couple of Wisconsinites, Badger Staters, here to talk about election integrity and other issues connected to the big Supreme Court election on Tuesday in the state, pitting a Republican against a Democrat in what is supposed to be, in theory, a nonpartisan election, drawing lots of national attention and big money, most expensive judicial race in American history. And Elon Musk was going on Sunday, and he's in the news today because he made a little change in what he's doing. He was going to give $1 million to people who voted. And the state attorney general said that wasn't really kosher, as we say in Wisconsin. And so he changed the deal. He's giving $1 million to people who sign a petition. And he deleted a tweet, which he rarely does. So maybe we'll talk more about that. We will talk more about that when we get to Wisconsin. But first, a little news. The vice president and his wife went to Greenland today, and boy, they did a ton of stuff. I'm going to show it to you in a minute with our guests because I want them to comment on it. Went to Greenland, commented on, basically said Denmark hadn't done right by the Greenlanders and they should consider an alternative relationship. Markets are down again today. Horrible month, one of the worst months we've seen in a while. There's still a day to go because Monday is still March. But here's the market tallies for today. This would be, there you go. You don't need me to tell you what number this is. Number 12. Brought to you by our friends at the Bahnsen Group. The Bahnsen Group, of course, David Bahnsen's outfit, Personal Wealth Management. I recommend them for that. And I recommend David's newsletter, Dividend Cafe. I read today's already. It's excellent. And you can sign up for Dividend Cafe, the regular newsletter from David Bahnsen, the Bahnsen Group. Everything you need to know about markets and investing at tway.tv/TBG, the Bahnsen Group. As you can see, markets down again as we head towards next week when it's expected that President Trump will unveil some number of tariffs. I can't tell you how many business leaders I've heard from today. You see the same thing on social media. I'm not saying they're pining for Joe Biden, but people in the real economy, people in markets, they just don't like all the uncertainty. They do not get the tariffs. Today, the president had what both sides described as a pretty good call with the new prime minister of Canada. Amongst other things, the president did not call him governor, which was taken in Canada as a sign of something. And Mr. Carney, Prime Minister Carney, and the president had a good call, as I said, and we'll see what that means for coming up for the tariffs next week. A bunch of court rulings, some for, some against the president, DOGE and immigration related. As you know, my policy, not to disrespect the district court judges, is to not waste time talking about district court decisions most of the time. So go on the phone and read about them if you want. Nothing earth-shattering there. The White House did settle with Skadden Arps, one of the law firms that hadn't yet been the subject of an executive order targeting them. in the now familiar triptych of pull their national security uh, clearances, bar them from federal buildings, and threaten their clients. So Skadden has agreed to provide $100 million. I think that's 60 million more than Paul Weiss did in their settlement. 100 million in pro bono legal services to Trump-related causes, and they're also establishing some sort of fellowship, I think, for conservative lawyers. Skadden Arps joins Paul Weiss in the Hall of Shame because they're caving to the bullying of the White House. Several other law firms now in court. I think there are three big firms now who, instead of caving, are going to court and seeing if they can continue to win. And I believe they have a good chance in the Supreme Court. We shall see what happens there. Is that all the news I want to tell you about? I think it is. There's a few other odds and ends, but let's bring in our guests. Our guests are outstanding. I've already sort of introduced them, so introducing them again would seem like the Department of Redundancy did that redundancy. But here's Lindsay Keith. Lindsay Keith, welcome in. Thank you for joining. Unmute. Very happy to have you here. So while I bring in Lindsay, I'll remind those of you who may have forgotten, or tell you, those who don't know, that Lindsay went to the White House briefing. What day was that? On Wednesday?
On Wednesday, yeah.
On Wednesday, and you sat in the new media seat. Just so you know, I've applied to sit in that seat. Haven't heard a word from the White House. So I'm hoping to go with an iPad on my chest, like a sandwich board, and have the question not come from me, but a member of the two-way community. Maybe the White House doesn't like that idea because they haven't called for me yet. Was that your first time asking a question at the briefing at this administration, or no?
It wasn't my first time to ask a question, but it was my first time to get the first question, which was really great. Yeah, it was really great.
And I haven't been to a briefing since this administration started. What's the kind of mood in that? Is it tense in there? Is it exciting? What's it like in the briefing room? Because it's packed every day, but what's it like?
Yeah, and I want to answer a question, but I first want to say, Mark, thank you for having me on, and what you're doing at Two Way is incredible. So, and people are loving it, and it's an honor to be on with Rich too. So good to see you. But you know, it's really interesting because this is my first time to cover the White House in person and actually be in those briefing rooms every time that Caroline holds a presser there. But they're packed. And so it's fascinating because people who cover the Biden administration are pretty grumpy because there's so many people in the room. And before, only the seats were taken, and they said many of them were empty as well. And now there's 49 seats specifically in the room who are dedicated to everyone, as you know, Mark, but for people listening in. But what's fascinating, if you see the camera looking back at the media, there's at least 50 people standing as well. And it's pretty tense in there. You can barely get your arm up to answer questions. So it was nice to be in the new media seat where I could sit down, because normally I don't have a seat, and get that first question. So that was fun to experience. But yeah, it gets pretty intense in that room, and it's packed as well. People just so eager to cover this administration.
Yeah. Thank you for being here. Rich, thank you for being here. Rich is barely old enough to remember. Like when I covered the Clinton administration, they had this thing where like there used to be no cameras covering the briefing. It used to just be for no cameras. And then they said a few minutes could be on camera. Yeah. And now the thing is just a made for TV show. And it's just a lot of drama. And of course, this press secretary is extremely adept at sparring. So I gotta get me to one pretty soon, but I'm sort of waiting for the invitation.
Nice to have you in there.
I was waiting for the invitation because I'm not a big stander. It hurts my back. Rich, again, thank you for joining. Have you been to a briefing since this term started?
I haven't. I'm not a big White House briefing guy. I'm not in DC, and I don't find them hugely useful because it's a little bit like conventions now, where the actual proceedings you can watch on TV. Now there are a lot to be learned behind the scenes. But I will say, Mark, by the way, speaking my age, I am old enough to remember you revolutionizing political media for a couple decades now. And Two Way is just it was just a direct connection from the note to Two Way. And also my hats off to our mutual friend David Bonson for help making it possible.
All right. David is great, and of course a big supporter of your publication. So who's had your job, Rich, before? Who's been the editor of National Review?
Two others, William F. Buckley Jr., of course, and then my dear colleague John O'Sullivan. So
those are big shoes.
They are. I try not to think about that. It's a little bit the way it's different now, but I don't know, 10 years ago or so, there only been 3 people have been managers of the Dodgers. So it's a little bit like that.
And did you know Mr. Buckley?
I didn't prior to getting hired by National Review. I was hired basically as a glorified intern, and I got to know him over time when I was working as a young journalist at National Review. And he picked me when I was 29 years old, which was completely terrifying, but it's another story.
Wow. What year did he pass away?
It was when was it?
I don't mean to put you on the spot. Somebody will look on Wikipedia, put it in the chat.
Was it prior to Obama? I think it might have been prior to Obama, but it's the 100th. I do know it's the 100th anniversary of his.
It was 2008.
Of his birth. Yeah,
so
the 100th anniversary of his birth.
I met him once, and I was in his presence another time. My dad was once on firing line. And I went with him when I was a kid. I don't know how old I was. And that guy, and I know, Lindsay, I'm not even going to ask you if you ever met him because I'm pretty sure you didn't. But that guy had such presence.
Yeah.
He's just one of those people. When he was in the room, like you knew he was in there. Just like, and again, like I say, Bill Clinton's like that. I don't know many people like that. That guy had such presence, and he was such a genius.
You know, it's funny. It's funny you say that. It's absolutely true. And you know, a TV star. The way a lot of people are TV stars, like everything you did on TV, like don't do that. Don't have your tie askew. Don't have your hair messy. Don't lean over. Don't use big words no one can understand. Don't have these long discursive conversations. But all that worked for him. But I had lunch with Trump, I don't know, about 1.5 years ago now, and I came away, and this is heretical for some folks that aren't. He reminded me a little bit of Bill Buckley, just not the kind of intellectual side, but the sheer presence, knowing you're in the same room with a big person, and there's no substitute for that.
Yep, I agree. I know people want to have us get through the news, but I just got to say one other thing about Buckley. If you've never watched the Gore Vidal, William F. Buckley, 1968 convention commentary, you should go on YouTube and watch it. So ABC was the third-rated network then by far. It had nothing going on for them. They're way behind NBC, CBS. And so they decided for the conventions that they would have Gore Vidal and Buckley come in and be like the commentators. And talk about a failure to extend the presumption of grace. They were crazily hostile to each other. And it didn't take long for them to heat up and get hostile. But it's incredible TV. But the stuff they were arguing about until it got personal was quite interesting. So if you've never watched it, I recommend it. Fast forward to 1996 when Bill Clinton was having his convention in Chicago. It was not expected to be a very exciting convention or election. As it turned out, Dick Morris got caught in a scandal, and it lightened up the convention quite a bit. But before that happened, I was working as a producer covering the convention. And I said to my boss, let's book Gore Vidal and William F. Buckley to come in and reprise their so
I think that didn't work, correct?
Didn't happen. I was on a future episode. I'll tell you why it didn't happen, but I really wanted to make it happen. I thought it was like an ingenious idea.
The amazing thing about that debate that the documentary brings home is before the famous blow up, it was bloodlust. I mean, they were at each other's throats. Yeah. Personal almost immediately, and they're sitting knee to knee. You know, it's just
it's great. It's incredible. And I should have mentioned, as Rich did, there's a documentary about it that's just, I find it incredibly compelling. It's really well made, and it's an incredible moment in American history. And those two guys are incredible. Lindsay, do you know Gore Vidal's famous comment about being on TV?
No, I don't, but I'm watching this documentary this weekend.
Oh, you should definitely watch it. Rich, you know the quote? You know the quote I'm talking about?
Yeah.
I think it's Gore Vidal. Huh. He said, never turn down being on television or having sex. That's what he said.
Okay. You know, I remember Fred Barnes saying the first part a lot.
Yeah.
But
never turn down. Yeah. I think that's right. Somebody Google that. I'm pretty sure that's the quote, and it's Gore Vidal, and it's very funny. All right. We're starting with Vance going. The Vance is going to Greenland. There's so many interesting things happen. The thing that's gotten the most attention is the vice president, God love him, as Joe Biden would say, loves to use profanity. Number 2, please.
Hey guys, how we doing? Please, at ease. At ease. Good Lord, sit down and eat. Sit down and eat. Don't let the vice president stop you guys from getting your chow here. How we doing? It's cold as shit here. Nobody told me. Well, thank you all for everything you do, and thanks for having us. So please sit down, guys. Please, please. I want you to eat your food. Usha and I are thrilled to be here. It's a really beautiful flight, actually. You fly over some pretty cool spots. I've never been to Greenland. Apparently, I'm the first vice president to ever visit Greenland, so that's a pretty cool thing. But we're looking forward to hanging out and getting to know you guys and understanding what you do. So I think what do we have? So we're gonna talk to the command and some of the guardians about what exactly the base does and all the important ways it contributes to national security. We're going to get a briefing, of course, about what you guys do every day, and then we're going to talk just about, as you've heard, we have some interest in Greenland from the Trump administration, so we're going to talk a little bit about that with our friends in the media. But I just want to say thank you all. Thanks for having us, and thanks for being here. Thanks for doing what you do. The colonel told me that this is a one-year unaccompanied duty station. When we were flying in, we were wondering whether you guys were allowed to bring your families here. So I know it's a lot of sacrifice to spend a year away from your families, but the mission is really important. The Trump administration, the president is really interested in Arctic security. As you all know, it's a big issue, and it's only going to get bigger over the coming decades. So thanks for doing what you do.
All right, play one more. There's tons I'd like to play, but it would take all night. Play number 4, please, Sam.
What this is about. There is no amount of bullying, no amount of obfuscating, no amount of confusing the issue. Our message to Denmark is very simple. You have not done a good job by the people of Greenland. You have underinvested in the people of Greenland, and you have underinvested in the security architecture of this incredible, beautiful landmass filled with incredible people. That has to change. And because it hasn't changed, this is why President Trump's policy in Greenland is what it is.
All right. Go ahead, Sam. Show the still photos while we talk, number 1. Lindsay, what do you think of the Trump administration's posture towards Greenland?
So my dad was actually stationed in Greenland when I was a baby. So I've always been interested in Greenland myself, actually. But, it's fascinating to me because we have the base that they were at, our space base there, Bidufik, I think is how you say it. But then there was Sonderstrom, that's where my dad was actually stationed, which was an air base that closed in 1992. And it's fascinating to see how Trump has handled his foreign policy and kind of this posturing. We saw this with the Panama Canal, this just strongman approach, opposed to going in with negotiations, which he's a master of, and saying, let's expand our presence there. Can we reopen Sonderstrom? Can we expand the Space Force there? How can we do that? And partnering. And it seems like he's just going bull in the china shop. And to do that, and then you hear almost 2 messages as well from the vice president there. In the first clip you show, talking about the reason we need it is for international security, for peacekeeping efforts. But then in that last clip, he's talking about the Greenlandic people and how the Danes haven't been treating them very well. And so it's almost like, which one is it? Obviously, we know it is more about international security as Russia and China are building up their presence in the Atlantic. But I think it's fascinating to try to have this kind of approach as well, to act like, America is the savior of Greenland and helping save them from the Danes who aren't treating them well, which, some people might say is true. But every report so far we've seen with polling shows that the Greenlandic people don't want to be acquired by the U.S. And this is where I think, Trump could go in his negotiating power and make people fall in love with him and say, yeah, we actually really need you. You're going to bring a lot of greatness to Greenland. And, it's also fascinating to me that he hasn't tried to broker some kind of deal like he did with Ukraine to mine rare earth minerals, because that's another reason he's saying he wants it. So why not instead of acquiring, which seems off the table right now, why not build up that relationship? And maybe it would end in an acquisition, instead of this approach where it seems like you're forcing yourself into someone's house and they're like, we don't want you. We don't want you. We don't want you. And I think that on the world stage, you see this kind of with Canada. It's having this unintended consequence where America is getting this reputation of, people wearing shirts there, leave us alone. We don't want the Yanks, all this stuff. So it'll be, to me, Trump knows oftentimes what he's doing with his strategy, but this seems like a different strategy to me, where why aren't you using your strong negotiating power and just trying to strong arm yourself in? We'll see if they break. And I think that's what they want. But so far, it doesn't seem like there's signs of that.
Rich, what do you think of the policy such as it is?
Well, we don't quite know what it is, right? And I think there could be a pivot here. This is very often part of a Trump negotiation strategy, right? You go in really hard, really threatening, and then you turn around and you say, let's make a deal. And I would imagine, right now, tomorrow, next week, if the Trump administration just went to the Danes and say, you know what, okay, let's just work something out, they'd get everything they want. Short, I think, of sovereignty over Greenland. That's probably off the table unless we're really, really going to push it. And I'm just not sure how much advantage we would get, what the delta would be between having all of it and just getting the Danes to give us any base we want, any guarantees that other countries will have nothing to do with it, mineral rights and all the rest of it. I think all that is there for the taking. But if we were actually to annex Greenland, you're potentially talking about blowing up the Western alliance for not a huge amount of upside that I can see. But this visit got everyone's attention.
Yeah. Rich, how would you appraise the vice president so far in serving in this administration? What's he doing well? What's he doing poorly? How would you appraise him?
I think it's been a lot like the campaign in terms of just being out there and being an advocate for the Trump position on whatever it is. He's nearly flawless, right? And during the campaign, what were the couple missteps? He got ahead of Trump a little bit on whether Trump would veto a national abortion bill. There might have been one other thing I'm forgetting. Otherwise, he went everywhere on hostile interviews, friendly interviews, and just was incredibly deft. And I think that's what we've continued to see. Maybe the closest you'd say to a misstep was what he didn't expect to become public. What he said in that Signal chat about Trump doesn't quite understand how this is inconsistent, bombing the Houthis to open up this waterway for the Europeans to use. He addressed that today, and of course addressed it very deftly. So there's no doubt this guy is incredibly smart and talented.
Yeah. Lindsay, what do you think?
I don't disagree that he's extremely talented and smart. However, I would say, I think what we saw in that chat with his aggression towards Europe, we saw that in his first speech when he was in Europe, that he's been, we saw this with his stance with Ukraine as well, even before he was vice president on the campaign trail. It seems like he does have a disdain for our relationship with Europe, which you've seen that kind of pick up with President Trump as well. This kind of position that, we shouldn't be, we should be a strong ally of Europe, but ultimately at the end of the day, they should pick up a lot of the pieces in protecting themselves. And we see that with Ukraine, with Russia, that we shouldn't have such a strong defense as we have in the past. And I think, to me, that was some of the concern about J.D. Vance, that he would have this type of influence on President Trump potentially. But I think ultimately, to Rich's point, he is a good spokesperson for Trump. I don't see him misstepping in that way. It seems like they are aligned and on the same page. I still think it's really fascinating. The last thing I'll say here, you had the president, I think this was a month ago now, in one of his first interviews saying, that he wasn't the natural person to take his position. So it seems like he's still maybe not quite there in the president's book. I don't know if anyone's asked him that again, but to me, that's really interesting of how the president sees J.D. Vance.
Great. Well, all right. Go ahead, Rich. And then Dean, unmute yourself. Go ahead.
Trump understands leverage, right? So he needs JD to be totally loyal and wants him to be 100% there for him. So he's not going to say, oh yeah, I'm going to endorse you in 2028 now. That's a carrot that's going to continue moving down the track until we're much closer to 2028, I would expect.
All right, Dean, welcome, and tell folks who don't know where you are what's on your mind.
Dean from Ohio. First, I want to thank my lovely redheaded wife for letting me spend this time on a Friday night. She thinks I'm crazy for spending all this time on two-way, but she doesn't know. She didn't know. Lindsay, you're great, but what a treat to meet Rich Lowry. I've got a question for Rich. Rich, William F. Buckley was to Rush Limbaugh as Rich Lowry is to who? Who's that figure that's on the radio? That's well, not the radio, podcast, pretty much. And you don't have to choose one. Who are those ones that you would equate to, in similar vein?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and thanks for spending your Friday evening here, despite your wife's doubts. I would say, the media landscape, obviously, in general, and especially on the right, is more divided than ever before. So it's really difficult to make that kind of comparison. And I'm not suggesting any sort of similar relationship that you're positing from Buckley to Rush, from me to someone else. But in terms of the kind of a more traditional conservative take of someone who has a mass audience, I'd say it's Ben Shapiro or Eric Erickson. But it tends to be, if you have a mass audience now, you're quite mega and you're very populist. That's kind of the coin of the realm in that arena, in a way it wasn't when Rush was coming up in the 80s and 90s.
So if I could get a quick,
go ahead.
I'm just going to say a quick follow-up. Where do you see the conservative movement moving? It seems to have been moving so interestingly in the last 10 years. Where do you think? Where do you think it's going in the next 10?
Yeah, it has been interesting. Well, I think it's the next couple of years. It's wherever Trump goes, right? If he's in favor of tariffs, most Republicans are in favor of tariffs. Whatever it is, he's the leader of the right at the moment. He's a legend. He's a folk hero. He's basically his own media, walking and talking media entity. So the various strands under his shadow, but he looms largest.
Dean, thank you. Appreciate it. Grateful to have you on always. Thank you so much. My best to your wife. Tom, welcome in. Quick question, if you can, for Lindsay and for Rich after you unmute. Tell folks where you are.
Hey, thank you, Mark.
Of course.
I'm an expat. I live in Panama. First time, long time. I caught you on the circus back in the day, and you came up on the algorithm. So this is the first time I've kind of opened up and tried to join in. Like everybody else, I want to thank you for the platform. One of the things that I learned here, I joined months before the election, was that going into the election night, I felt like I absolutely knew what was going to happen, with the exception of 2 points. Were the women going to come out in large numbers to vote because of abortion? And would the people that don't normally vote come out for Trump? So I don't know that anybody said that. A lot of people have thanked you for insight. But I've never gone to an election where I thought, I know what's going to happen. I just need a few exit polls to let me know. So thank you for that. And
thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Rich, and the lady here tonight. I didn't hear her name, so I'm sorry.
That's all right,
but,
Lindsay.
The bottom line is that I grew up born in Washington, D.C., went to American University, grew up in Bethesda, right down the road from NIH. As a Kennedy Democrat, my dad was in the union. He worked for CBS Television, Washington, D.C., so our dinner table conversations were, well, I talked to Walter Cronkite today, or Edward R. Murrow. We were really into politics. When the abortion issue came, my dad, solid Catholic, said, I'm a single issue voter now for the rest of my life. So I guess my question is, Trump came in and destroyed the old Republican Party. We have a new party now. And I got to tell you, it took me a while to catch on. I am a 3-time Trump voter. But it seems to me that the Democrats need to have somebody, a luminary, come out of the woodwork and take them to the center. And, this is an obvious thing to say. I don't have a specific question or comment about Greenland, but I'm very concerned about the Democratic Party, the need for a second party that can act as a check and balance.
All right, Tom, thank you for that. And thank you for your kind words. Let's let Lindsay in because she's got to go in just a minute. Lindsay, where do you see the future of the Democrats? Is there a savior on the horizon?
Yeah, it's a great question, Tom. I don't see anybody who's an obvious answer to that right now, honestly. I think there's a fight for that race. But at the end of the day, Democrats do have, I think, a fundamental question to answer, which they have not been able to find, that is if they have an issue with their candidate and their candidates, or with their policies and their positioning. And so far, a lot of them would say, and Mark can jump in here, Rich, if they disagree with me, many of them think that it was the candidate and not necessarily their policy and their stances. And I think that's where they're fundamentally wrong. You look at how they have postured themselves, and they lost, even low-income Americans. They lost the working class American. And that's because you see someone like Trump that is able to, there's an appetite for people just to tell it like it is. And many people who voted for him feel that way. You don't really have people like that in the Democratic Party, sans a few, who are willing to just, talk like them and act like them. You see someone maybe like a John Fetterman who has been willing to work across the aisle or vote with Republicans, and you don't have enough people necessarily like that. And that is a time where Democrats are too afraid to align themselves because of concern for DOJ and stuff like that. But I think this is where Democrats are missing the ball. And you even saw that with this Tesla burning and someone like Mark Kelly, selling his Tesla, getting rid of it, and he didn't buy a new electric vehicle. He bought a gasoline vehicle. And it's kind of this virtue signaling that I feel like Democrats have done for a long time. This has disenfranchised American voters. And this made it feel like it was unauthentic, that if you were buying this in the first place because you cared about the environment, then when you sold it, why didn't you buy another electric vehicle? And it's moments like that that I think they've missed the mark, and they're losing their constituents. And until they figure that out, I think they will continue to see the same results.
Lindsay, before you go, tell folks where they can see Merit Street Media and your work.
Yeah, so you can go to merittv.com. We have an app. You can watch it on also the web. And then also we're also on cable. So preventing whatever your platform is. I'll be on at 7 p.m. That's why I have to jump tonight. I have to go get on my show. But it's been an honor to be here.
Lindsay, thank you.
Thank you.
Very grateful for you for joining, and we hope to have you back soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
And Tom, thank you. Grateful to you. So there are three kinds of columnists. Okay. There's ones I never read. Okay. Paul Krugman, Charles Blow, they could write a column. The headline could be, this is the map to the fountain of youth. Just won't read them. Then there are people I read some of the time. I'll see what the topic is. Maybe I'll read it. Maybe I won't. Then there's a small group of people in my whole career. I'll read everything they write. I just, no matter what, no matter how busy I'm, read everything they write. Bill Sapphire was like that for me. Peggy Noonan's like that for me. Rich is like that for me. Read every column Rich writes, because everything he writes is interesting. It's thoughtful. It's creative. It's fair. And the reason I say that is, what you have to be to me to be a good columnist is two things. You have to be a good observer and a good reporter. And Peggy is a great observer and reporter. Bill Sapphire was. David Broder also. And Rich, you are too. And that's why when this piece of video was put on the menu for us to show, I couldn't have been happier. I thought it was kismet that you're on tonight to talk about this. This is number 8, Sam. This is Donald Trump today in the White House during the swearing-in ceremony for the acting U.S. attorney in New Jersey. And I just want Rich, after it ends, to just freeform, because he totally gets Trump. Go ahead and play it.
Is a woman, and why is it important that we understand the difference between men and women?
Well, it's sort of easy to answer for me, because a woman is somebody that can have a baby under certain circumstances. She has a quality. A woman is a person who's much smarter than a man, I've always found. A woman is a person that doesn't give a man even a chance of success. And a woman's a person that in many cases has been treated very badly, because I think that what happens with this crazy issue of men being able to play in women's sports is just ridiculous and very unfair to women and very demeaning to women. And that's got to be about a 94%. I read today it was a 94% issue. And I watched the other day, a congressman, a well-known Democrat congressman, fighting for the fact that men should be allowed to compete essentially in women's sports. And I say, I hope they keep that going, because they'll never win another election. That's a big deal. But women are basically incredible people, do so much for our country. And we love our women, and we're going to take care of our women.
We're going to take care of women. Rich, just freeform on that thing, please, as you can.
Yeah, first of all, thanks so much for the kind words. And I feel as though even though we weren't talking, except for on air, we had kind of a mind meld during the campaign last year, and where things were headed. So look, that's just such a Trumpian answer, right? It's funny. it's hilarious. And if anyone else, if those words were printed out and another politician or someone else read them, they wouldn't be funny. But there's just something about the way he talks and presents himself that's just hilarious. It's entertaining. You want to listen. And this has been a huge advantage of his since he came down that escalator. And of course, going back to this 80-20 issue that Democrats really hurt them in the campaign, they're still tangled up on. And I don't think Democrats are going to find an answer anytime soon. I don't think out parties, generally the members of Congress, figured it out. Maybe an exception was Newt, but even in 1994, Republicans are going to have a massive blowout in that midterm, even if Newt hadn't risen to prominence with the Contract for America. But they need to give up fighting on this. Democrats clearly they do, and it's just a handful that seem to get it. And I think kind of Fetterman is a potential model for Democrats, not him himself, but just being interesting, being plain spoken, being willing to slap down the left in really high profile and memorable ways. At the same time, you're not really giving up any of your substantive commitments as a progressive. Seems to me that's a model, but they need the horse in 2028 who gets that, can actually do it.
You mentioned tariffs before. Are you at all persuaded by the intellectual argument that's made by some that tariffs are good for the American economy?
I'm not. I'm convinced on China. I was convinced I was wrong about that by Trump and his supporters a while ago. But these auto tariffs, I think, are a huge mistake. Now, we'll see how long they're actually in place or what they look like ultimately. But when you're implementing a policy that is meant to help a certain industry, and that industry itself is saying, please don't do this. Don't do this. It's going to be a disaster. We're going to be harmed in so many ways. That's a pretty good sign. It's a bad idea. So this is the foremost foreseeable political threat to him, right, is prices. He ran on prices, a huge issue in the campaign. Almost immediately after the campaign, he began minimizing it, and now he's instituting tariffs that, it's not going to be, technically speaking, inflationary. It's not going to lead to spiraling price increases, but it's going to lead to one-time price increases that people are going to feel. So I worry about this one.
Okay. Greg, welcome in, unmute if you would. Tell folks where you are who don't know and what's on your mind for Rich Lowry.
Thanks, Mark. I'm calling from New Jersey. Been listening since before the election, so really enjoy the platform and the conversations here. Rich, been a listener of the Editors Podcast for a long time, so it's an honor and a pleasure to speak with you tonight. My question, I know you're a history buff, Rich, so I'm curious. I've been thinking about, in terms of the elections, I know we've had 7 in the 21st century. I know we talk a lot about 2016, 2020, but I'm curious your thoughts on if the 2012 election would go down as probably the most important election of the century thus far. And curious if Romney had run, what would have the impact had been? Would there have been a Ukraine invasion? Would Trump have been arisen? What would have been, I think, the consequences of that?
It's a great question. I mean, it's hard to answer the counterfactuals right, but my colleague Dan McLaughlin's written about this. 2012, that was the seed for the rise of Trump. And if you're going to put your finger on one thing, it was that, I believe it was the last debate, the Candy Crowley foreign policy debate, where Romney, is correct about a criticism he's making about Benghazi, and he gets corrected in real time by a moderator who's not supposed to fact check, right? We have more experience with this now, and Romney's sort of beaten down by it. I think that's the moment when a lot of Republicans are like, okay, we need an animal, right? We don't care who he is. We don't care how uncouth he is, whether he has experience or not. We need an animal. So I think that was the flap of the butterfly wings that created the hurricane that was Donald Trump. And also Romney, he was, even though he had a image very much as a conventional Republican, from central casting, right? Almost too good looking, too perfect. But he was tough on China. He talked about self-deportation famously. So those were little indications of things that Trump would pick up. But what would be dropped, obviously, was the emphasis on entitlements. And if Romney had been capable of being more of a populist and hadn't had that position on entitlement reform, who knows? He might have won, and all of history would have been different.
Greg, thank you. Great question. Appreciate you coming on. Your nice words about both my platform and Rich's. Appreciate it. Thank you. Welcome in, Joe. Tell folks who don't know where you are, what's on your mind, please.
Hi, guys. I'm Joe from Bridgewater, New Jersey, central New Jersey. I've been on a couple of times. Mark, I think you're going to get to the briefing room, and I predict that you're going to get there probably within 3 months. But
okay,
we'll see. That's my prediction. Rich,
right.
It's an honor really to talk to you. I think when the last time I was on this program, it was at night, or maybe the first time, I mentioned the editorial you had in the Post about tariffs in Canada. And I thought it was spot on. Why would we, if 75% of their products are coming to the US, why would we want to throw them into recession? So I'm a Trump supporter. I'm conservative. He was not my first choice, but I disagree on the tariffs, with maybe the possible exception of China. But I was going to talk about, Mark had mentioned this before. I was going to talk about the fact that I see the country is so divided. And I see that fostered by the media. I think, the PBS and the NPR hearings were just a great example of that. It's like, as long as you have 90-10, Democrat to, Republican or liberal to conservative, you're going to have this absolute outrage all the time. I mean, I have very thoughtful friends, and they just cannot stomach Trump. They just cannot stomach him. And I think part of it is because they've been fed by the dominant media, Mark, as you like to say, this constant barrage. And I think Trump is so circle the wagons on everything and don't apologize on anything that he does, that I think he's that naturally, but I think because of the media, it just makes it worse. And I just see it with my family and friends. It's just a comment. My last point, though, is when Rich, you brought up the whole or when Donald Trump was talking about the transgender issue. I live in Bridgewater, New Jersey. There was a board of education. It's a Republican area with a Republican mayor, and there was a board of education meeting about changing the transgender policy, and people came out in droves on the pro-transgender side. So they did not change the policy. And there was this glowing article in our local paper about how great that was. So even though Trump thinks it's a 94 to 6% issue, even in a Republican area in a blue state, that's not true. That the battle is really yet to be engaged, and they're fighting hard. I think they had people come out. They had like 100 people come out and basically dominate the meeting. So there's a lot of work to do on that.
Joe, thank you. Rich, comment on that.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think we are clearly winning on the trans issue. I have no doubt about that now. And when Gavin Newsom feels compelled, now I know he likes to, a little Clintonian, and likes to say whatever someone he's with wants to hear, but that there's a fairness issue is a sign, right? And that's how you win is in politics, is you stake out a position, then the other side has to adopt it. And I do think we'll see that eventually, but it's gonna be a long road for the Democrats.
All right, thank you for that. Thank you for the question. Want to switch to Wisconsin. As probably most of you know, there's a big election there, Supreme Court race for control of the Supreme Court, and it's a challenge to hold elections these days. We've talked about this before with folks from Keep Our Republic. This is an important group, bipartisan group made up of people connected to elections, to the law, to politics, who are doing their best to restore what's central to maintaining the republic, which is elections that not only are free and fair, but are perceived as such. And honored and grateful to have with us tonight two Badger staters. John, am I going to pronounce your last name correctly? Vaudreuil, is that correct?
Just Vaudreuil.
Vaudreuil. All right, John Vaudreuil.
I'm French Canadian.
All right, former U.S. attorney. How many U.S. attorneys are there in Wisconsin? Just one?
There's two in Wisconsin.
Yeah, two.
Yeah, Milwaukee and Madison, Eastern and Western.
Eastern and Western. Which were you?
I was the Western 2/3.
Western 2/3. All right.
Madison.
And Marge Bosselman, who's the Wisconsin are you the Wisconsin election commissioner or a Wisconsin election commissioner?
A Wisconsin election commissioner.
How many are there?
Six. There's six. Yes.
And are you elected or appointed? How do you become one?
We are appointed. Yes, there's 3 Democrats, 3 Republicans. Two of the Republicans and two of the Democrats are appointed by the legislature. And the third of each party is a clerk, which is what I am, and a retired clerk. And we are proposed, there are three names proposed to the governor, and the governor then picks one.
Got it. And how long's your term?
5 years.
And where are you in your cycle here?
6.
6. All right. There's got to be a story there. They couldn't find anyone as good as you. Why are you in your 6th year?
Kind of a funny story. No, it's not. I was going to be reappointed. I needed to be reappointed by the Republican legislature, and they need to submit 3 names. But rather than submitting 3 names, they submitted my name 3 times. And then the governor didn't do anything, and therefore I just continue because there's no vacancy.
All right. So you're Wisconsin election commissioner for life, maybe. Could be. All right. Marge, what else is on the ballot besides the Supreme Court race?
Well, we have local races on this one. So you have the Supreme Court race, and you also have the school board. Those are the 2 state races. But in April in Wisconsin is basically nonpartisan. So you have school board, you have city council, you have county, you have mostly local elections then during this time. There's only the 2 state elections.
And the Supreme Court election is ostensibly nonpartisan, correct?
Correct.
But Brad Schimmel is a Republican and Judge Crawford is a Democrat. And this is, I believe, by all accounts, the most expensive judicial race in American history. John, why is this such an expensive race? And does that give you any concern?
Two answers. First, I believe it's expensive because the issues, whichever side of the aisle you're on, the issues are enormous. Public sector unions, reproductive rights, voting rights, fair, maps. However you look at those, just 3 that come immediately to mind, it puts you on one side or the other of this. We have 7 members on our Supreme Court, 7 justices, and it has been essentially, if you think of it this way, a 4-3 liberal, more progressive view. One of those is retiring, so this is to tilt the court one way or the other. Which is why I suspect it's brought in $100 million. Yeah.
So it's going to be 4-3, quote unquote, Republican or 4-3 Democrat. Are a lot of your Supreme Court decisions 4-3?
They are, but not always, as you might suspect, aligned along party lines. Along those, they're sometimes a little different 4-3, and there's been decisions that haven't been 4-3. But I'd say maybe 40% of them are 4-3, but a fair number aren't.
Yeah. And just to annotate that point, I believe, you tell me if I'm right, John, I'll stick with you, and then I'm going to go back to Marge. On the kind of issues you mentioned, abortion rights, reproductive freedom, labor issues, redistricting matters, those do tend to break along partisan lines, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's why the stakes are so high. Marge, if you were to make a list of the top 3 concerns you have about making sure Tuesday goes well, what would be on your list of 3?
The Wisconsin elections are the most decentralized. So all the elections are done by municipal clerks. And I have a lot of faith in the municipal clerks. I am not, there's not a lot of worry that I have. I hope that there's a lot of turnout, that everybody is able to get to the polls. I think it's important to make sure that everybody's voice is heard. But I don't have a lot of concerns, kind of like we might have had in the last few elections, that maybe things might go wrong. I think everybody's pretty prepared. Everybody's ready. Clerks are ready. They are, in Wisconsin, those people who run our elections at the polling places are our neighbors. The people we see in grocery stores and churches, they're all around us. And there's a lot of faith in what they do, and they are professionals. They do it very, very well. There's lots of training behind it. And I have a lot of faith in the poll workers and the municipal clerks that run the elections.
Marge, let me ask you if your impression is the same as mine, not just in Wisconsin, but it's my impression around the country. Keep Our Republic did a great job in 2024. Trying to make sure that elections could be run well and making sure election officials had the space and the safety to do their jobs. It seems to me, from talking to people about election administration since the election, that the fact that the election wasn't contested in the way we've seen in some past elections, in the sense that no one challenged the result. President Trump won all the swing states by decent margins, that there's a little bit more calm now. There's less fear, there's less anxiety over the functioning of elections than there was just last year. Do you share that impression?
I do. I think things are calmer. I think I think people are more relaxed, and I think that people see voting as being important. I voted today absentee in person, and I live in a small community, and I was told that the absentees in persons voting is very high for this election. So I believe there's a lot of people who want to be out there and who want to vote and are going out there, and they are voting, maybe even more than what they did in years past. I think they see elections as being important.
Do either of you want to comment on Elon Musk's $1 million offer and how that's impacted how people are thinking about the election?
In a nonpartisan comment,
yeah,
I will say that that plays Wisconsin voters for fools. If Mr. Musk thinks that whether they're Republicans or Democrats in this state, that they're going to change their mind because he's running what is I happen to think is illegal, but apparently it's not at this point. I don't think it will make a difference. If it does, it is entirely possible that it backfires against him.
Do you think even his revised offer is illegal, or just the original offer?
I never prosecuted state law. I prosecuted all federal crimes, so I'm not a state crime expert. He's clearly backtracking a little bit. He was going to be in Wisconsin, I think, tomorrow to hand out his $1 million checks. I'm not sure that's going to happen. It's just unfortunate. This is a really important election. I know Brad Schimmel. I know Judge Crawford. These are good people. They believe what they believe. As Marge said, we have 1,900 election clerks from townships to counties who really do a great job, and they run a great, fair elections. And then this sort of throwing this into the mix, it's unfortunate for somebody who's lived in Wisconsin all his life.
Rich, questions for our guests?
So my understanding, talking to Republicans, the scheme for $100 million checks aside, is Musk has thrown a lot of money in the race, and it's kind of evened out a financial advantage Democrats had. So Republicans are feeling a little better. Plus, they seem to be seeing activists from Musk's organization and also Turning Point USA on the ground. Any take on the just the financial equation generally?
Well, I'll take a stab. Or Marge, why don't you take a stab if you want to go first?
The money comes in and for the voters to see. The money makes no difference to the way the elections are run in Wisconsin. There is no difference at all. It is done by law. It is done professionally. And there is nothing that the money coming in is going to make anything different at the polling places or on election day when people go to vote. So whatever the voters, however they look at the money coming in and the advertisements or whatever, that's up to them. But there's not going to be a difference at the polling place as far as no matter how much money comes in. The polling place is going to be run the way it's always run.
John.
Following up with Marge, I agree. I really do agree. And one of the things I think is important to note for everybody, Keep Our Republic's goal is to restore trust in the election process. It isn't to get an issue through or a vote through a certain way. So I think what Marge says is spot on. This kind of money maybe there's somebody, a voter thinks a certain way, doesn't think a certain way. But in terms of faith in the process, as long as it doesn't affect the process itself, and I don't think it will, it certainly won't, then we at Keep Our Republic have achieved what we want to achieve. The idea, it was very unfortunate. A week or two ago, Judge Schimmel raised the specter of vote early. They're going to make this big ballot dump in Milwaukee. He knows that's not the case. He knows it's a central count. All these absentee ballots can't be processed early. That's Wisconsin law. He knows that they all have to be taken to a central place. And this is a big city. And what I feel is unfortunate is when whichever side, weaponizes a lack of faith in the process, because that's simply not true.
Question from Ray, or comment from Ray Marcano, my friend from Ohio.
Thank you, Mark. John Marge. I'm wondering if anyone in Wisconsin, when I say anyone, it's either people in your sphere or people that you know, are troubled by the continued injection of partisanship in what is supposed to be nonpartisan elections. From my personal view, I think that partisan judges can actually do more damage to democracy than Donald Trump. And we saw that when Janet, and please excuse me, I will probably butcher her name, so I'm not even going to try. When she ran on abortion back in the last cycle. So is anybody troubled by this?
I think the better question, or I shouldn't say that, Ray. My response would be this: for many elections, Supreme Court candidates in this state didn't say anything about how they felt about any issue. That's kind of made it nonpartisan, more nonpartisan. It was determined by the attorneys board and the judicial board that it didn't violate judicial ethics to tell people where you stood on issues. It's a very slippery slope. Oh no, you can't tell people how you're going to vote, but you can tell them how you feel about certain issues. But we have crossed that bridge. We've crossed that Rubicon, and Supreme Court and other judicial candidates are allowed to tell us how they feel about certain issues. We are not a state where we appoint judges. We're a state where judges are elected, and that's the business we're in at this point.
Great, thank you. John and Marge, I just couldn't be more appreciative of your spending some time with us. And as I've said, since Keep Our Republic came on our radar here, so grateful to you and your organization in the states you're in to do this. Vitally important. And we've seen some progress. Again, I think in part because the election last time was well run, but that's a big part of what you all do is allow your colleagues who administer elections, state, local, to do a good job. And so we're all very grateful to you, not just for spending this time with us for the hard work you've done now for months and years, making sure that your state is a model for the rest of the country. So thank you for making time and for doing the work that you're doing.
Thank you for
Let me
inviting
throw
me.
this up to Rich. Rich, did you ever read William F. Buckley's sailing books? I may not be philosophically on the side of Mr. Buckley, but he was a wonderful sailor, and his books about sailing on the big blue oceans were spectacular.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not a big sailor myself, so I must confess I haven't read them. He had these Friday evening sails from his home in Stamford, Connecticut. I just went on one of them, and we ran aground because the anchor was thrown out. It didn't take. The tide went out. We were like 25 yards on dry ground at a 45-degree angle all night. And it wasn't my fault the anchor didn't take, but he never invited me again. He made me intuitive. Maybe I didn't have the best time on that sail. But yeah, if you're a sailing fan, those things are absolute classics.
John, I think of a Wisconsin sailor like a Manhattan mountain climber. I'm not really sure. Can you sail on lakes in Wisconsin?
We race fast boats, and we race them on water, and we race them all winter on ice.
Awesome. All right. I haven't read the sailing. Thank you both. I haven't read the sailing books either, but I've seen great photos of him on the boat and part of his mythology. Thank you both. Grateful for you both. And Rich, so grateful to you. I hope you'll come back more often. I'm not sure why you haven't been here more.
I've just been watching on Twitter, so wondering when I get invited. So I appreciate it.
All right. Well, we'd like you to come back regularly and super grateful to you for making time. And thanks, again, you can find Rich's work both in his magazine online, but also in the New York Post. And I recommend you read every one.
I always benefit from your commentary and reporting. So thanks, Mark.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you all for watching. I want to make sure you know about a program we have coming up this Tuesday night on Two-Way Tonight. A special program with two co-authors who happen to be spouses, Dina McCormick and David McCormick, Dina Powell McCormick and David McCormick. Dina served in national security positions on Capitol Hill and in banking, and David, of course, is now a senator from Pennsylvania. And they've written a book called Who Believed in You? It's a book about mentorship and inspiration. And some of the people who are featured in their book will also be with us. It's a great episode. It's a great book, which I recommend you buy. But also I recommend and would like you to come join us on Tuesday night to hear the story of the stories from their book about how it is important to be mentored and to mentor others. So look forward to that on Tuesday night. And as always, that episode, like tonight's, will be sponsored by the Bonson Group. Grateful to you all for watching. Incredible week here at Two-Way. And I'll be back at home base on Monday. And I look forward to seeing you 9 a.m. Eastern time with Dan and Sean for the morning meeting. Thanks for watching. Have a great night, a great weekend.